Hello, and welcome to the weekend episode of Views of an Outsider, Narratives Part 3, Inner Narratives. We began this series by taking time to consider the sheer volume of harmful narratives that we spend each of our days swimming through, often without noticing what all of this is doing to us. Like fish in a murky pond, we know no other environment than the one that we're used to. So we don't consider questioning any of it until the day comes along when one of the other fish swims by and calls out, "The water's great today." Even then, the first question that comes to our mind is, what is water? For lack of having a better metaphor, you have to realize that you are in the matrix before you can begin to tackle the problem of doing something about it. We only know what we know. We are always looking out at the world as we perceive it through our own eyes. We are who we are, and we are the sum of our experiences. But what if we could open our eyes a little wider and change how we perceive life by taking in a broader, more all-encompassing point of view? Every once in a while, something that someone else says startles us and offers us the chance to do that very thing, to see things from the outsider's point of view. And we should all take advantage of those opportunities every time they occur in our lives, especially in this case when it comes to thinking about the stories that we allow to take root and live rent-free in our heads. At the worst, you learn a little bit more than you knew before, and that gives you a little bit more to work with going forward. So the first thing we did was to go over a few examples of narratives that we are so used to that questioning them, even to understand them better, is akin to blasphemy. We considered how much we should take for granted, given the track record of the evangelist in question, and the high cost that listening to them has produced in our own lives. These narrative claims may not all be 100% false 100% of the time, but shouldn't we at least question every claim and try to rationally look at each one from every angle before we take it seriously enough to let it impact our lives? Isn't that just the bare minimum when it comes to being a properly functioning adult? Is it really wise to unthinkingly allow ourselves to be contaminated by every piece of sewage that floats our way in today's fast-paced world? The truth is that things don't have to be the way they are. We have let this become our lives, and we can change it if we want to. All of the things that are making people so miserable these days really are under their control. I know it doesn't necessarily feel that way, but it is true nonetheless. Sometimes feelings are just that, feelings. They aren't always important. And they definitely aren't always an accurate reflection of the way things really are. They can make for good fuel when it comes to motivating ourselves, but feelings always make for very bad guides if you allow yourself to go through your entire life being led around by them. So I will accept that most things feel like they are beyond our control, but I'm here to tell you that they simply are not. You do have a choice. We all do. And in a much shorter space of time than you would expect, you can change your life to an unrecognizable degree that you may believe is completely impossible right now. I know that because I've done it. I'm living proof. And along the way, I've learned a lot about myself, about how much to pay attention to my feelings, about how to steer them instead of them steering me, and about what actually makes for happiness in this life and what doesn't. And yes, in general, I am happy. Life isn't perfect, and I don't lead a fairy tale existence where I have everything that I want. But this is my life, and I am living it. And embracing that has made me happy. You can't get so hung up on where you'd rather be that you forget how to make the most of where you are. So after we had talked about some of the unhealthy narratives that surround us on all sides, last week we moved on to talking about how we can replace this new norm of glorifying the polar extremes with a return to sane moderation in the middle, where the vast majority of people have always fallen. It's time for the healthy people in society to take the culture back from the most broken and most sick fringe radicals. That is not to say that we have to treat those people badly, but they need to set their own house in order before they expect to be looked to as someone who has the qualifications to tell everyone else how to fix the world. And embracing moderation does not mean that the right path always lies at the midpoint of compromise. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the path that is needed is very much to the right. Other times, we may need to turn to the left. So while the answer is often somewhere in the middle, it can't always be found there. There are no easy patent answers that you can use in every situation like a cheat sheet. And only lazy minds believe that everything can actually be reduced to that level of simplicity. Finding the answers requires really contemplating the complex facets of a problem on a much deeper level than just parroting what the people on your favorite team have to say about it. But in my case, and hopefully in yours too, like Ronald Reagan, I care a lot less about left versus right than I do about up versus down. And to be clear, up is the goal here. The middle ground of barely managing to hold things level is the bare minimum of what is acceptable, but it should not be the goal that we are actually aiming for. And going down, well, all I can say is that people who take life seriously enough to know a little bit of history know how unbelievably bad things can get. And once you know how far down things can go and how quickly you can get there, you realize that failure is not an option, or at least it shouldn't be. So like I said, going to the middle ground of compromising is not always the right answer, but going towards sanity always is. Last week, we thought about the improvements that we could make as a society in terms of progress if we edged out the fringe groups on the right and the left and decided instead to aim upwards by encouraging everyone to embrace mass sanity and celebrating those people, instead of listening to the craziest people out there as they each try to scream louder and get more attention than the equally crazy person next to them. After all, that particular show has been playing for a few seasons now, and to be honest, it wasn't that great to begin with. And either way, even if you did find it entertaining in the beginning, it's mostly just reruns at this point, so I don't know about you, but I'm ready to move on. Can we at least agree that life would be better if we were more firmly grounded on something more solid than this culture of insanity that we have allowed to engulf our lives, even if we can't yet agree on the best route to that stable existence? Can we at least agree that solid footing counts as aiming up? This week, we aren't going to talk about society or fixing it. After all, fixing the world, or even your own country, is an enormous job that takes a lifetime of tireless, consistent efforts. And you only get one of those, you know. Everybody can do their part to improve the big picture, but no one can do it alone, no matter how much of their life they devote to it. Making headway on that grandiose cause is slow going, and you have to have the capacity to keep putting your shoulder to that stone over and over, even when it keeps rolling back downhill and you seem to be getting nowhere for long, discouraging periods of time. Only the hopelessly naive person believes that such an impossibly big job could be accomplished otherwise. So let's be honest about it. Changing the world is a long and difficult task, and the improvements, if we make any, are often so slow and incremental that they are easy to miss altogether because we are so distracted by the ultimate goal and how far away it still is. It can feel as though things never truly change, present times accepting. Whatever you may think about today's changes, whether you love them or hate them, I don't think anybody would try to deny that there are a lot of changes going on right now. For all of the negative accusations that get thrown around these days, I have yet to hear anyone claim that things are too monotonous and boring in today's world. But like I said, today isn't about the narratives that our society has been telling itself. It's about your own. We are a storytelling obsessed species. And whether you have ever given it much thought before or not, you are telling yourself a story about who you are and about what is happening to you in your life. And like it or not, the gist of that story, the author's perspective, often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. As someone who was born with health problems that seriously impact my life, I am well aware that some things are outside of our control. We aren't gods, and we can't dictate the reality of what we've been given to work with. People do get dealt crappy hands through no fault of their own. But it would be equally as false to say that nothing is within our control as it would be to say that everything is within our ability to change. And once again, people have shown a tendency to gravitate towards one of these extremes or the other instead of accepting that the truth lies at the point of sane moderation. Yes, some things are beyond our control, and they happen to us. We didn't deserve them any more than the guy next to us did, yet it happened to us instead of to him. We only have a problem with that when those things are negative instead of positive. In the latter case, we often won't even notice the random unfairness of the situation. But either way, randomness does play a part in our lives. There are also other people with free will living on this planet, 9 billion of them, in fact. And we do end up being affected, and not always for the better, by the choices that they make. But the problem is that we are also a highly communal species. We are just wired that way. You can punish the most dysfunctional criminal element of society by putting them in solitary confinement. And it can completely break even the most hardened human monster. That should tell you something. We need each other, like it or not. And if you are looking for a surefire way to guarantee that you will be miserable in this life, then you should decide to waste your life trying to stamp out the very nature of what you are based on the way your species is hardwired by evolution or by design. If that sounds unfair, all I can say is shoulda, woulda, coulda doesn't count for anything in this life. What matters is the reality of the way things actually are, not how you wish they could be. For better or for worse, we are stuck with each other. And if you think that trying to control your contrary self is an impossible task, then it's even more deluded to think that you will succeed in controlling the autonomous free will of other people. I feel safe in guaranteeing you that taking that approach is another surefire losing strategy that will only bring you failure and misery. So, I think we can agree that some things in our life are outside of our control. But here's the secret. The rest of it is absolutely within your control. And the really good news is that portion makes up the majority of the stuff in your life. It may not feel that way because often the 20 things that are in your control are small things, while one of the big things that is contributing to your misery is beyond your control. So it feels like the impact of those 21 things doesn't balance out in our favor. The problem with that way of thinking is that you give up before you even try. So it all stays negative. The stuff that will be negative anyway because you can't control it, and the stuff that doesn't have to be that way because you could change it. Here's another secret. Those so-called little things that you could change pretty easily, add up to a much bigger impact on your daily quality of life than you would expect them to. Let's say, for example, that you hate your job and your social life is empty and you're just overall pretty miserable. Ask yourself, do you hate your job because you truly hate what you do, or because your boss is an unreasonable jerk who makes your time there a living hell and whose behavior is beyond your control? Trick question, because both of those situations are within your control. It's true that you can't control how your boss acts towards you or towards anyone else, but you can take real steps to actively try to improve your life by finding a different job under a different boss. Or you can take real steps to actively pursue a different career altogether if that's the problem. The only person in that situation who is guaranteeing that you will still be miserable tomorrow is you, by doing nothing and just continuing to let that situation consume more of your finite life. Now, if every boss that you've ever had is an unreasonable jerk, then you might truly be the most unlucky person on earth. But more likely than not, that is just the story that you are telling yourself, and the real problem that is following you from one job to the next is you. If on top of a miserable career, you spend your days keeping a scorecard of all the wrongs that you think are being done to you, and then you go home and take a certain amount of pride in wallowing in your own martyrdom as you tell yourself that the world is unfairly out to get you, then can you really be surprised when you get exactly what you are looking for? Misery, stemming from your list of perceived grievances. If you look for the bad, expecting to find it, you surely will. I know when that happens, the injustice of it all feels very real. But that doesn't mean that it actually is. Our feelings have a way of inherently pretending that they are based on the facts, on the way things really are, but they very seldom are based on objective reality. The truth is that the world doesn't care enough about you to be out to get you. I know that might sound cold, and in a way it is. But it can also be liberating to realize the truth of that cold statement. No one is going to care if you try and fail, except you. And no one is going to get in your way or try to stop you, except you. That's the good news and the bad news. If you are being crushed by loneliness and no one wants to be around you, can you honestly say that you would choose to be around you if you had a choice in the matter? Because if you can't honestly say that you enjoy spending time with yourself, not just that you are justified in being the way you are, but that who you are makes for an enjoyable experience, then how can you judge other people for not enjoying being around you when you don't either? The only difference between you and them is that they don't have to take it and suffer through. You can tell yourself that being the way you are is natural given your circumstances, and maybe it is. Probably not, but let's assume I'm talking to the exception to the rule here. Your attitude and misery is completely justified by your life. Okay. Do you want to be justified? In other words, right? Or do you want to be happy? Because focusing on one of those things could actually improve the situation, and focusing on the other is going to get you nowhere. You'll stay exactly where you are. One is important, and at the end of the day, the other one really isn't. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be happy? Choose. I'm not trying to pick on you. I could justifiably tell myself that I got dealt a crappy hand in life through no fault of my own too. I could easily be right and be miserable. I didn't ask for my genes. I didn't ask to grow up visibly different from the other kids or in a highly dysfunctional family. I didn't ask for my childhood, such as it was, to end at 8 years old when my brother became terminally ill and I had to watch him slowly die over the next long 9 months. I didn't ask to know what it was like to see my best friend lying in a coffin before I was 10 years old. I didn't ask to spend my youth on operating tables and in waiting rooms, having 25 surgeries instead of going to dances and out on dates, or going to college, and having the luxury of getting to be young and dumb and woke. I didn't choose a life where I never got to experience falling in love with someone or having a family of my own, which were the two things that I wanted more than anything else in life. They were the only two things that I really wanted, in fact. I didn't ask to live every day of my life coping with some level of pain and struggling every day to do things that other people take completely for granted. I didn't ask to lose a lot of my independence while I'm still in the prime of my life, like being able to drive, for example, which I loved and was one of my few joys. I didn't ask to bury the few people that I deeply loved and who I had in this world to love me back. I didn't ask to be facing the likely scenario of going completely blind at some point or ending up bedridden for years before the end comes. So yeah, I could make a case that was at least justifiable for feeling that I had been dealt some bad cards and for believing that the hand I have to play dooms me to a life of misery. I don't say all of that to throw myself a pity party right now. I said all of that so that you'll know that I do get it. Life is pretty brutal, and sometimes that isn't our fault. But I've built a pretty happy life for myself anyway, so you can too. I want to help inspire you to decide to do that if I can. Because yes, all of those things are part of my life, and I can't change that. I have control over fewer things than most people do, and yet, with what I have to work with, I've found real happiness, so I promise you that you can too. My life isn't perfect. If I had a magic wand, I'd change a few things. But I've discovered that you don't need perfection in order to be happy, which is good, because you're not going to get it. That doesn't mean that you can't truly be happy, and not just a making do kind of happy, but honestly, this is a pretty good life kind of happy. The first thing that needs to change if you're serious about finding your own version of happiness is to stop letting your misery be a point of pride that you martyr yourself on, as I see so many people doing these days. So many people are intentionally making themselves more miserable than they have to be, and they don't seem to realize that they are doing that. They choose to go on living their unhappy life rather than doing something else. And all the while, they tell themselves that there is no other choice, and their misery is an inescapable result of the world around them, instead of a result of the world that they have built for themselves and refuse to abandon in favor of allowing themselves to hope enough to dare and try something else. But big changes really do happen as a result of little steps that you decide to take. I know that may sound trite, but it is the truth. And a big part of the story that you tell yourself, the narrative that is trapping you in your misery, is based on the diet of what you are letting yourself absorb from the outside world. I'm not just talking about the obvious kind of diet, although you'd be surprised how much a quality diet affects your health, and how much your health, or lack thereof, affects your mood. But right now, I'm talking about your mental and emotional diet. If the few people that you hang out with and call friends are a bunch of miserable, disgruntled people who also believe that the world is out to get them, and all you do when you get together with them is to sit around and for the millionth time compare your lists of all the ways that you've each been mistreated and complain about the state of the world or about politics, is it really surprising that the result is that you end up feeling even more jaded afterwards and thus even more unhappy? If the people that you engage with online are a faux support group of angry and nihilistic people, or a group of highly unstable outcasts that only have one thing in common, their misery, or a bunch of loser trolls beating up on other people in a failed attempt to feel better about their own miserable lives, then is it surprising that you walk away feeling like the world is a cesspool? If the TV shows that you watch are dark and full of awful tragedies or evil and deranged sociopaths, then however interesting they are, is it really a surprise that you feel depressed and anxious each day? If the source of your news, the podcasts that you listen to, or the people you follow, are successful based on sending out a message that everything is a shadowy conspiracy, the country is collapsing, the world is falling apart, democracy is under attack, and the apocalypse is nigh, claiming that we are about to become Hitler's Germany, complete with camps and smokestacks, is it any wonder that afterwards you feel angry, agitated, and aggressive towards your fellow man, instead of being in a frame of mind that would allow you to find some common ground with him and see him as a human being instead of as a subhuman enemy? If you doom scroll for hours on end, watching real people die in drive-by shootings, in wars overseas, and in violent animal attacks, is it really surprising that doing this would impact how you generally feel about living afterwards? If you slink into a dark corner somewhere and watch porn, sinking to ever lower levels of depravity to scratch a growing itch, is it any wonder that you feel pathetic and ashamed about being unable to control yourself? What you allow yourself to take in is important. It affects you. It would be insane to believe that it doesn't. And continuing to do it out of habit for the rest of your life, dooming yourself to what you have right now in this moment, would be such a completely pointless waste of your one and only life. What if you actively paid attention to your environmental diet for a while, instead of just absorbing all of the sludge that happens to drift your way in the algorithms, as though it is just one of the countless things that you have grown used to believing that you have no control over? You do have a choice. Embrace that empowering knowledge. What if you turned off the news for the next month? I know you might miss something important. So what? It's important to be informed. I know. We accept that as a fact, but is it really true all of the time? Can you tell me why it's important for you to be informed about everything that happens every day of the week, 24/7? What do you do to change things in our world after you've been informed by everything that you take in around the clock every day? What nuclear bomb would go off if you didn't? One less flag might be posted in your bio. So what? I know you don't actually believe those empty gestures actually change anything. Right now, you've got a couple of years until the next election. It's the perfect time to take a break. Until then, you're along for the ride anyway. What's the worst that could happen if you gave yourself permission to focus on you and made a deal with yourself to catch up on all of the BS later, when there's a real reason to do so, because it will affect a choice that you're going to make? Just start with a month. If you aren't noticeably better off, go back to what you were doing before. You've lost nothing. Or you could moderate to setting yourself one day a week to get the news. Believe me, the protests and the causes will continue on with one less person cheering them on from their keyboard. The world will survive, probably continuing on the exact same path that it would travel down if you had been there to participate. But if you keep on taking in all of this toxic waste, you might not go on. And who will save the world then? What if you actively evaluated the podcasts that you listen to and the online content that you consume over the next week? Ask yourself how you feel at the end of each one. If you're agitated, angry, anxious, or just generally negative, especially if that isn't a fluke and it's a consistent reaction that you realize you have had throughout the week, then do the healthy thing for yourself and unfollow them no matter how much you like them and want to support them. They won't know that you're gone. See what 6 weeks without any of those negative influences feels like, and go from there. What if you did the same thing when it comes to all of the people that you interact with on social media and the television shows that you watch? Make a point of noting your mood afterwards, and cut out anything that has a negative impact, even if you otherwise enjoy it. It's just temporary. If the resulting improvements aren't worth it to you, then you can always go back to the miserable life that you have right now. What do you really have to lose from trying out a little detox? What if you made a decision that any of your friends who aren't the best influence on you, any of them that are reinforcing bad habits or tying you to a life that you don't want anymore, even if it makes things a bit lonelier in the short term, for the sake of having the possibility of real improvement to the life you will be leading a year from now, isn't the healthy thing to do for yourself to let them go? It doesn't mean that you are judging them. It just means that you need something else right now, and you are giving yourself permission to do what you need to do in order to improve your life. It's hard to go through lonely chapters, but don't you feel alone right now anyway, deep down? It's true that it might take a little while before you've made enough progress in terms of your outlook to have something that is worth offering the type of people who would actually make a positive contribution to your life. But it will be 100% worth it. Deep down, you don't really want to be around the people who make you even more miserable, and neither does anyone else. So you can't expect a healthier crowd to take you in while you would be to them what your current friends are to you. So it might be more lonely for a little while as you work on being a person that will be ready for a new life, but it will be even slower and less likely to happen at all if you don't let go and remain entangled in the relationships that are creating this environment of negativity that is a fundamental part of the very thing you are trying to change about yourself. The same is true of romantic relationships. No one likes being alone, but it is better to be alone for a while if at the end of that time you can be with someone that you actually want to be with, as opposed to someone who makes your life worse. If deep down you're with this person just to keep yourself from being alone, or if they are just a placeholder while you hope that someone better will come along, or you're hoping that this person will magically change into the type of person that you actually want to be with, then let them go. Loving someone for their potential, for who they could be, if you succeeded in changing everything about them, which you won't, isn't actually the same thing as being in love with them. You aren't in love with who they are. You're in love with a fictional romance character that you've created and Hannibal Lectered their face onto. What if you decided to give up all of the addictions that you're secretly ashamed of deep down? Anything that is unhealthy for you or that forms barriers between you and the healthy relationships that you would really like to have, even if you've never allowed yourself to admit it? What if you cut off your subscriptions to any pornographic websites and picked an activity or a hobby that you could distract yourself with while you work on overcoming the destructive habits that you've built? Just take action, any action. Stop putting off change while you wait and try to get motivated. And just do the thing, motivated or not, whether you feel optimistic about it or not. The same would be true of recreational drug use or drinking too much, etc. Cut yourself off from the supply. Plan an alternative and stick to the plan. Do everything that you can to remove temptation from your path and then ride things out. Avoiding temptation is easier than resisting it. Don't try to take on forever. Just set short, manageable goals. And then when you achieve them, celebrate those successes and see if you can set another short-term goal and hang on again until then. One step at a time. It may not be impressive or meme-worthy, but that is how real change happens, one baby step at a time until you find yourself in a whole new world. And often you look back and realize that it was easier than you thought it would be during all of those years of trying to get motivated. The main thing that was getting in your way during that time was the story that you were telling yourself, which is that baby steps would never get you anywhere, so why bother? It's like the Shawshank Redemption. The other prisoners didn't dig because it was completely pointless. And it was. But 20 years later, Andy was on the beach in Mexico, and the other prisoners had wasted 20 years and would go on wasting the next 20 years too, telling themselves that there was no point to such tiny efforts. It's true. 20 years is a long time to dig, but I promise you that it won't actually take you 20 years to turn things around. And even if it did, you're already miserable. So if you keep doing this, you'll still be miserable 20 years from now. 20 years of trying is no worse than 20 years of wallowing, but one has at least the potential for hope at the end of the tunnel, and one doesn't have any. 20 years in a prison like Shawshank is a long time, I grant you. But the prisoners who didn't dig spent that time in prison just like Andy did. They didn't spare themselves a single day of it by not digging. And in the end, they were still there, and he wasn't. If you try for a year and get nowhere, you won't have lost a damn thing. You'll be no worse off than the guy who did nothing and just sat in his misery during that year. And the reality is that you will be better off. I know that you will. You only get one life, and you know the result of what you're doing right now because you're living it. Do you really want this to be all that you have until the day that your life ends? You might as well try something new, and if needed, try something else. But you know what your current choices are going to produce. Change is your only hope. And you know that change realistically isn't going to magically happen and produce some other outcome tomorrow all by itself. But if you have nothing, then you have nothing to lose. Start small. I know it's not sexy, but start small. Just take one step. But start. Start right now. Pick something, anything, and actually follow through on doing it. Actually taking that first step towards change is hard. It's not easy to choose to hope, to summon up the determination to proactively work towards something better when you feel like it's hopeless to try. And if you've embraced nihilism and resentment to the point that they are your whole identity now, and they are a point of pride with you at this point, if you see the people who are brave enough to hope and try as a bunch of suckers, then it's going to be even harder to commit to making a change in the hope that it will actually lead to a positive result. But I promise you that it can. You can do this, but only you can do this. No one can do it for you. The little changes that I made were ones that I took having no goal in mind. And they still led me to places that I would never have expected them to, and to a purposeful happiness that I believed was beyond my ability to create or experience. I'm not trying to sell you a fairy tale. I didn't fix all of my problems or make all of my dreams come true. If I could have things my way, I would have gotten to really fall in love once in my life. I would have built a family and become a mother, and I would have gladly poured my whole life into those things. That didn't end up happening for me. And the truth is that those dreams probably aren't realistically in the cards for me at this point. And that is sad and painful. It's okay to be sad about those things and to wish that I could have had them on this journey. It's natural to want those things. And it's not unreasonable to feel regret over missing out on them. This is not the life that I expected to lead. This life is not all that I would have it to be. And yet, by the grace of God, it is now a good life despite everything. So I can either embrace the misery, because in an ideal world, I would choose to have some things that are beyond my control turn out differently. Or I can choose to embrace the life that I have, which is a pretty happy one, and continue making my one and only life as good as I can for as long as I have it. I've chosen to embrace life, and I hope that you will too. If you were listening last week, you know that I am unable to give you a headline episode this week, but there were a few headlines that I just had to comment on, and since we have the time today, I'm going to do it. In the UK, the Supreme Court officially ruled that trans women are not women. Thank you for clarifying that. We were so confused before that ruling. We live in a bizarre world where the basic realities of life, biology, and our eyes have to be confirmed by the experts before we can all admit that we know what we already know. Okay. Here in the United States, Letitia James, who prosecuted Trump for claiming property values that were higher than they really were, and tried to claim that that was somehow defrauding the bank, even though he paid back the loan, and even though the bank never disputed the property prices that he had listed, has been revealed to have done the exact same thing that she accused Trump of. She, too, has falsely inflated her property price values in order to get more favorable banking loans. Just proving the Bible was right when it told you that people always accuse other people of doing what they're actually guilty of themselves. The Democrat governor, Josh Shapiro, was the victim of an anti-Semitic attack by a crazy person who apparently broke into the governor's mansion, set it on fire, with the intention of bludgeoning him and his family to death with a hammer because he thought that was going to, help Palestine or something. Plus it was Passover, and Josh Shapiro's a Jew, so, we know these crazy people love just any excuse to declare open season on Jews. Of course, Shapiro's own party won't defend him and say, yeah, you actually shouldn't kill a governor just because you're a bigot. If they said that, they might lose their base. And Lord knows, at only 20% approval ratings, they can't afford that. So I guess they're going to have to just let them get Shapiro because, they've created the crazy and let them take over the asylum. A supposed all-female crew went into space. Now, to be clear, this was not an all-female crew. This was an all-female passenger list. The ship was remotely crewed from people on the ground. These people are not astronauts. They are rich friends of Bezos, I believe it was. And he paid for them to ride into space. When the world failed to be impressed with their unique accomplishment of being good passengers, the women in question became outraged and compared themselves to Alan Shepard, who was the first American in space, and the second human being in space, an actual astronaut who was part of the process, who piloted the ship. And these women said that they were just like him because, while someone else piloted the ship from Earth, they rode, and they did take the same path that he did. So that makes them the same, which, as others have pointed out, I guess that means every time I make a phone call, I'm Alexander Graham Bell. Okay. There are actual women out there that can be celebrated. The Russians, I believe, sent up a woman into space at one point. It was a single-person crew, kind of like Alan Shepard. But technically, that would be an all-woman crew. You can actually celebrate the real people. You don't have to make shit up. But apparently we do. And the senator from Maryland, Chris Van Hollen, announced on Tuesday that he was going to travel to El Salvador to check on Kilmar Garcia. Now, if you've not been following this story, Kilmar Garcia was a man who was accidentally deported to El Salvador. The story that the media told everyone was that he was a gay makeup artist who was in the United States legally and who was snatched up from his home in a raid based on a complete mistake and deported to El Salvador that he had no history with, and was put into El Salvador's very harsh prison system. While they were shaving his head, he cried and they smacked him around. That was the initial story. But if you've learned to take media stories with a grain of salt, the truth came out. And the truth is this. He's not gay. He has a wife and children. He's not a makeup artist. He's a member of MS-13. He was not in the United States legally. In fact, he was here illegally. And two different courts had found that it was credible that he was a member of MS-13 and had ordered his deportation. His wife had filed several reports accusing him of serial assault against her, and there are photos to back up the abuse he committed against her. And the only snafu in question was that once the courts had ordered his deportation, his lawyer made the pretty typical move of claiming that if they deported him back to El Salvador, he would be killed there. And while they checked out that bogus claim, they had ordered a stay on his deportation. And the Trump administration was deporting a bunch of people on planes like they have been, all of them gang members of MS-13 and Tren de Aragua and other violent gangs. And they had to remove one person from the flight, so they had an extra seat. And this guy that was on the deportation lists got bumped up, and they didn't realize that there was a stay order on his deportation, and they deported him. Now, the Democrats, including this senator, have decided to make it their mission in life to bring the illegal, wife-beating, violent gang member out of his native country, of which he is a citizen, and bring him back into the United States. And just to be clear, not only is it ridiculous that you would be sticking your neck out for this particular guy, but on top of that situation, they have completely failed to, say, go to Gaza and try to get Edon Alexander released from Hamas, who's actually an American, unlike this guy, and who, according to the other hostages that have been released, is being actively tortured by Hamas. Now, not a single congressman has gone over there for an actual American who is their constituent, but they have gone to El Salvador for a gang member who was not supposed to be in this country to be taken out of the country of which he is a citizen and brought back here. The senator arrived in San Salvador and tried to get the president of El Salvador, President Bukele, to allow him to see Mr. Garcia and showboat. And the president of El Salvador basically told him this was none of his business, which is true. He is a senator. He is not the president of the United States. He does not speak for the United States when it comes to foreign affairs. He is a senator of another country, so he has no standing in El Salvador. And how El Salvador deals with a citizen of El Salvador is El Salvador's business. You talk about Western powers going and sticking their noses into foreign countries, bossing them around about stuff that isn't their business. I thought we were supposed to be against that, but apparently that is now a virtuous thing to do on the left. And so presumably he will be coming home, but he's vowing that other senators will follow suit and go down there until this man is sent back to the country in which he was illegally occupying. Now, just for the record, even if that happens, which it doesn't look like it's going to, because President Bukele has shown absolutely no inclination to give up his citizen and send him back to the country where he does not belong and where he was committing crimes. But even if that did happen, the left would have you believe that that's going to result in him staying here, but there isn't any chance of that. I mean, none. So you could send him back, but he would go back to the exact same status that he had before, which was a stay on an existing deportation order while the courts investigated his claim, which would now be even more bogus because he hasn't been killed. So how you're going to claim, if you send me back, they'll kill me, when you were just sent back and they didn't kill you. And then the court will rule, yeah, they're not going to kill you. You have to go back. And then he will be sent back again. And the only thing they will have accomplished is wasting their actual constituents' tax dollars paying for this pointless show. Now, I'm sure that there are actual people out there who legitimately need to be defended, but rather than defending them, Democrats are making themselves even more popular by defending people like this. I don't really think they've thought this through strategically, but it is an interesting show. Meanwhile, the mother of a woman who was murdered by a different MS-13 gang member, not Mr. Garcia, but his fellow gang member. She was a mother of 5 children. She was raped and murdered and stuffed into a ditch by an illegal MS-13 gang member. Her mother, who has now gone through the most painful human experience imaginable, the loss of a child, spoke at the White House. And here's what she had to say.
To have a senator from Maryland who didn't even acknowledge or barely acknowledge my daughter in the brutal death that she endured, leaving her 5 children without a mother and now a grandbaby without a grandmother, so that he can use my taxpayer money to fly to El Salvador to bring back someone that's not even an American citizen. Why does that person have more right than I do, or my daughter, or my grandchildren? I don't understand this.
Yeah, the problem for Democrats is that no one else understands it either. We don't understand why you think it makes you the good guys to pick the very worst people and defend them while simultaneously failing to protect the people that you're actually responsible for, who actually vote, who are actually paying the taxes. You know, that might have something to do with why your approval ratings are at record lows. 1 in 5 people support you. 1 in 5. 4 people out of 5 are against you right now. This kind of stuff is why. And you might ask why I care about this story. Because Rachel Morin, the 37-year-old mother of 5 who was raped and beaten to death with a rock and then stuffed in a ditch, her killer was arrested in my hometown of Tulsa, Oklahoma. So I think that gives me a right to care. Even so, I did not weigh in on Mr. Garcia's case. The story has been in the news for a couple weeks now, and I waited until today to say anything about it because the left and the right were both telling pretty opposite stories about this guy. And I take that seriously. I don't want to be someone who jumps on the right side and says, who cares about this guy if he's an innocent person who really does need help? Nor do I want to be used and jump on the left side and wind up making my poster boy for heroism, let's die on this hill of saving this guy, turn out to be, as is in this case, a wife-beating MS-13 gang member. So, just goes to show you, you give it a few days, and usually the truth emerges. Michael Singleton was covering for Scott Jennings on CNN, and this is what a very small clip of their roundtable discussion on the subject sounded like.
I think it is a political issue. I also think it's a national security issue. Prince George's County in 2019, their gang unit determined that Garcia was an MS-13 gang member. His wife in 2021, the wife that's now giving lengthy testimonies about how great he is, said that he's a serial abuser, and she has a ton of photos to showcase said abuse. I agree, due process is absolutely important. We want to maintain that, but I think there's absolutely enough here to send this guy somewhere else. One, he's already broken the law. We've already established that. Now you do have evidence suggesting that he was a member or is a member of MS-13. He's also a serial abuser. This is not the type of individual I don't think any one of us would want in our country. He should be deported.
But respectfully, sir, Michael, we can't make it about Kilmar. Like, that's just one person.
That's the case we're talking about.
That is, but I guess if we look at the macro and not the micro, and just look at...
Okay, so you picked this guy. You said, this is the hill we're going to die on. This is the guy that we're going to stand up for. And then when the facts come out and they're not in your favor, that this is actually not the type of guy you should be standing up for, you're like, well, why are you focusing on this guy? It's not about the one guy. It's about the big picture of what else can you say at this point? No, it is about this guy. And the reason it's about this guy is because you picked this guy to be your guy. You went to bat for him without knowing what you're talking about. And now you look really bad. So, no, we're not going to talk about the big picture. We're not going to ignore the actual situation that is happening. If there is someone else who is being deported that actually shouldn't be, well, you give me his name and the actual facts instead of a BS story, and I'll be right there next to you to make sure that that person gets justice. But you don't get to say, here's a situation that is a prime example of injustice. Make up a bunch of shit about what the story is, then get called on it, and then say, well, why are we talking about this one story that I brought up? It's not about this one story. I'm sorry if your brain works like a ping pong table, just going pew, 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 all over the place, but the rest of us need like a connective thought here. You're going to actually have to stand by your own positions, because that's what adults do. And considering these people are journalists, once again, like the Democrat Party, this might be why your industry is dying, because there's nothing left to respect about it when you pull this kind of stuff. Anyway, those were the main stories from this week that I had time to cover. There's plenty of other places out there to get the headlines from, if you're looking for more than that. And anyway, I hope that I will see you again next week. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you did, please like and follow, because that helps make these things successful. And I appreciate each one of you that helps build this podcast into a success. And I hope you will come back again next week. Until then, have a good week, my friends.